Hello people, today I'll be trying a new format where I just compile a bunch of reviews and impressions of games I played within a month. These are all the games I've played in February, varying from action adventures, Metroidvanias, platformers, and more. Let's get straight into it, and I hope you enjoy. Onimusha Warlords is an absolute classic. The game started off as an idea of a Sengoku period Resident Evil that would take place in a ninja house filled with booby traps, puzzles, and more. It originally began development for the PlayStation 1, but pushed to be developed for the PS2. This was a big deal because Capcom was coming hot off the popularity of the Resident Evil series, and it probably would have been a safer bet to work on that with the new PS2 hardware instead of this new IP. The game ended up being a hit though. It wasn't as big in the West, but was huge in the East. It had elements that were groundbreaking for the time. It was a cinematic marvel compared to FMVs from the PS1 era that looked downright terrifying. The cutscenes in this game actually look good and pretty realistic for the time when you realize they motion captured the story segments. As for the game itself, it blends elements of classic Resident Evil titles like the pre-rendered backgrounds, fixed camera angles, light puzzle solving, obtaining key items to progress in areas that you'll return to, and you'll deal with some trap rooms. Where the game stands out from Resident Evil is the combat. Instead of trying to conserve ammunition for a firearm, you're primarily hacking away with a sword. The combat may seem simplistic by today's standards, but it laid the groundwork for iconic action titles like Devil May Cry and modern Ninja Gaiden. And while it's more simplistic, it does those simple things really well. The feeling you get from slashing enemies is super satisfying due to the blood effects and impactful sound design. It's practically crack when you successfully land a counter-strike as well. The game shows its age a bit, but primarily in its save and checkpoint system. It becomes frustrating when you die, have to load into the main menu, then have to load back into the game, and also have to sit through unskippable cutscenes all over again to attempt a puzzle that might kill you once more. It sucks absolute ass and definitely lacks in the quality of life department, but it's still a great game if you can get past some of its archaic shortcomings. I'd recommend giving this a play if you're super interested in classic titles, especially from the 6th generation of gaming, which was an incredible time that spawned some extraordinary franchises that we still see today, and super unique titles that we haven't seen since. Playing this made me even more excited for the upcoming Onimusha, and that new trailer sure did the same. So Ender Magnolia is a Metroidvania that's actually a sequel to Ender Lilies. Another fantastic title, and this one seems to be heading in the same direction. I still have to finish it, but I'm a few hours in and I've really been enjoying myself. One of the aspects of these games is that your weapons are actually spirits, or in this sequel they're known as homunculi. It's more simplified in this game, but you gain access to different ones that range from being simple basic attacks to heavy strikes and abilities, or projectiles, parries, and more. The combat is simple enough and isn't too demanding. You get your basic abilities and a dodge to weave in and out of attacks. The timing window is pretty lenient, and there's a break mechanic where once you deplete an enemy's yellow bar, they'll fall off balance, allowing you to deal more damage freely. There's a hard difficulty which scales up enemies and damage, but it's not too bad. Something I love is that touching enemies doesn't harm you, only their attacks do, which gets a thank fucking lord from me. More Metroidvanias need this. The bosses are pretty well done as well. I like the look of them, and they have distinct attacks that are well telegraphed, so if you're dying you primarily have yourself to blame. The exploration is pretty good so far as well. Plenty of nooks and crannies to get some loot, which varies between pieces that give you flat stats, or items that give you unique passive effects similar to the charms in Hollow Knight. The locations are somewhat distinct, but they blend together a bit because of the gloomy atmosphere, but they still look beautiful. The minimap is a nice quality of life feature since the game can get confusing at times, but the full map clearly details where you have and haven't been or should progress. The story and world has an air of mystery surrounding it as you're trying to uncover aspects about the setting, memories of yourself, and certain characters, so it has me interested enough. One of the standouts when it comes to Ender Lilies in this sequel for me is the music. Ender Lilies has a beautiful OST, and I find myself enjoying this one as well. I'd recommend giving Ender Magnolia a look if you're interested in a beautiful but somber Metroidvania. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. I'm gonna start this off by saying I absolutely recommend this game, and I believe it should be talked about more. Please note that I don't have any nostalgic ties to the films, so I went into this game pretty blind to its charms, and oh boy does it have charm. So much so that I started watching the movies. The presentation genuinely floored me. You can see it for yourself, but the character models, facial animations, the sound cues, the music, and the fantastic voice acting really sell the experience. I didn't even realize Troy Baker was voicing Indiana. I actually thought to myself like, yo, did they get fucking Harrison Ford for this game? Maybe you'll notice, but from any Indiana Jones clips or Harrison Ford media I've seen, I couldn't tell the difference. The narrative is very gripping as well, and I found myself wanting to see what was coming next. The adventure has lots of action-packed and memorable scenes like you're watching an actual motion picture. The characters were fantastic, but Voss is an incredible antagonist that steals the show. Their performance was awesome. Now when it comes to the game itself, it primarily consists of infiltrating restricted areas, exploring ancient dwellings, figuring out mysteries and puzzles along with some combat, and the game does all of these things extremely well. The puzzles are probably my favorite part about the game. They go beyond the typical puzzle of putting a block on a pressure plate. This game has a lot of interesting and unique ones that are fun to figure out, and they're not too difficult, but not too easy either. They have a perfect balance to get you thinking, engaged, and satisfied when you figure things out. What I love is that you'll actively take the time to look at notes and imagery or just use general logic to figure out how things should be put in place. I even took the time to pull out a pen and paper for one of the cipher puzzles. Now outside of puzzles, you're going to be using a good amount of stealth since you're typically infiltrating restricted areas. But what I like about this game is that you have different ways of going about objectives. You could use stealth, but maybe you'll find a disguise that lets you venture through these areas without needing to sneak about. And if you get caught, you'll be engaging in a lot of hand-to-hand combat. I genuinely love it in this game because your right and left hand are on separate triggers. The reason I really like this is because when you parry attacks, you'll have to alternate between different hands to get a proper counter-strike. You'll also have to be mindful because you have to manage stamina and you can be swarmed by enemies too. There's a variety of melee weapons you can pick up, and the whip also comes into play, allowing you to stun enemies, disarm, trip, or pull them. There's also some shooting, but it doesn't make up a lot of the game time and isn't the most efficient way of survival. You're mostly sneaking and fighting. Main thing that might be problematic for some people is that the enemy AI has some legitimate brain damage and will barely react to the world around them. You can actually knock an enemy out and have them crash off a cliff right behind someone and they won't notice. Another issue is some platforming and climbing sections. It can feel as slow as a constipated and sometimes your momentum from swinging on your whip just halts when you jump. Luckily, the game is super lenient when it comes to ledge climbing, so it was alright. The game is split between the main story and different types of side content, and the side missions vary between a simple collectathon to having their own stories and special puzzles, and the side stories are honestly super interesting and fun. Overall, I really enjoyed my time with this game. Solid presentation, narrative, characters, and gameplay. Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance is probably the most hell yeah kind of game I've played when it comes to the actual gameplay and even the goofy story. And speaking of the story, I'll assume it's intentional, but it legitimately made me laugh with how juvenile and edgy the depiction of the military-industrial complex, corruption, violence, and child soldiers is. But you can tell from how certain scenes are shot, this is just a simple action narrative where you're supposed to bask in its cool-ass enemy designs, crazy scenes, and set pieces. This is an action game in every sense of the word, and oh boy is the action good. The combat has what you'd expect, a light and heavy attack that you can alternate between to dish out different combos, a parry, and the dodge seems to be a move you unlock that's pretty satisfying to pull off. But the star of the show is the blade mode that allows you to freely cut horizontally and vertically, which shreds enemies into actual pieces. What's cool is that cutting a specific location allows you to pull out a vital organ to crush it. This is called Zendatsu. In order to do this though, you'll have to damage the enemy a certain amount or perform specific moves like a counter-strike to get the opportunity. What I like is that performing this move heals you and charges your blade mode back up, while normal attacks charge the blade mode as well. I really like when a game's systems feed into each other like that. Outside of fighting regular enemies, the bosses are super badass and were probably my favorite part about the game. Their designs are pretty cool and they play out in really fun ways. The action sequences are really kick-ass. The game also has a grading system after combat encounters and at the end of levels, which is cool, so I'll probably replay a few times to get perfect S scores for each of the levels. The only issue I had with the game was the level design though. It's super linear, which is fine, I don't have an issue with that, but the levels do a good job of wasting your time in minute but annoying ways, like having to press a button to open a door when you can cut everything else, or having to wait for the grading system to disappear so you can move on to the next section. It just breaks the flow a bit and I just sit there like come the f*** on. Other than that though, this is a fun game. Definitely a game you want to replay though, as it's pretty short. You'll get about 6 or more hours depending on how you play. Regardless, I recommend this if you're looking for a super fun action title. Just don't expect a deep narrative or insane level design. The focus is on the action and that action is solid. Bomb Rush Cyberfunk. I'm just excited to talk about this game. Holy shit, this is fun. And not just in a gameplay sense, but fun and overall vibe. I cannot help but feel happy playing this game because it's a Y2K love letter that goes beyond aesthetic. Playing this genuinely made me feel nostalgic because it brings me back to the 6th generation of gaming. It didn't matter if you were on a PS2, Dreamcast, Xbox, or GameCube. There was always something fun and unique to discover on either of these consoles, and that's missing nowadays. I didn't grow up with Jet Set Radio as I didn't own a Dreamcast or Xbox, but the only similar games I had in terms of street sports action were the Tony Hawk titles like American Wasteland, but I was always into the art style of Jet Set Radio. Bomb Rush Cyberfunk combines the speed and elements I love about the classic Tony Hawk titles and blends it with the visual eye candy and energy of Jet Set Radio, and I absolutely love it because it's like I'm reliving my childhood that I simultaneously did and didn't experience. This brings some variety in the mix though because you can ride on inline skates, a BMX, and a skateboard. You'll be combining tricks while grinding on rails, whether it be upright or upside down, riding on walls, going up half pipes, boosting on your jetpack, and hitting up some tags. But how all these things flow together is beautiful. Leaning in the direction of a rail's corner gives you a little boost and multiplies your combo. The same thing goes for wall riding, going up a half pipe and hitting a new tag. Manual riding extends your combo duration, and boosting on your jetpack while doing a trick boosts your combo and resets the duration. All of these systems play into each other very nicely, and it feels incredibly fun to get an extended combo running. But while I absolutely love this system and I really enjoyed my time with it, it is just a tad simplistic in terms of the tricks you can do. I wish they had the trick system of the Tony Hawk games where pressing a face button with different directional inputs would do different tricks, but that doesn't seem to be in this game. With that being said, while the game feels a bit more simplistic, it does those simple things really well. The main thing I'm not a big fan of is that the game has these combat sequences that just feel a little out of place. They don't play horribly or anything other than a certain boss fight not being super clear in what you needed to do, so it kinda sucks, but other than that, you can get through enemies quickly by attacking them then jumping to do a big AoE where you can tag them for a one-shot, but the point is that I'm not really playing this game to fight. Another thing is that some areas are inaccessible unless you're on a certain ride, and switching between them can feel tedious as all hell and a total waste of time. Other than these things though, I'm in love with the game. The story is super out there and fun too. You escape jail only to get your fucking head cut off with a record, which is replaced with a cyber head. Your goal is to get your head back, but in order to do so, you have to prove yourself by building your rep, by spraying tags to take over the 5 bureaus from different street crews. Sounds wild? That's because it is wild. There's more to the story and there's a bit of a conspiracy going on, but the primary objective is building your rep, doing challenges, and going against different crews in a trick battle to get the highest score so that your bomb rush crew is at the top. It's a super entertaining time, and my god is the music fantastic. If you enjoy hip-hop, funk, drum and bass, house, or anything with groove, you'll probably love the music. The game has tracks from a variety of different composers, and you're bound to find something you enjoy. It's a short game netting you about 8 hours for the main story, but probably 15 to 20 if you're trying to be a completionist. Regardless, this is a game you continuously put on to chill, listen to some music, and rack up some crazy scores. Simply put, I highly recommend Bomb Rush Cyberfunk if you're a fan of the Jet Set Radio games, classic Tony Hawk titles, and if you're nostalgic or interested in the early 2000s of gaming and street culture. Man, I love this game. So Blade of Agony is a cool one because it's actually a Wolfenstein mod for Doom 2 on the GZ Doom source port. To be clear, you don't have to do a complicated installation. It's available as a standalone package that works straight away. What makes this mod interesting though is that it's Wolfenstein with elements of Medal of Honor and Call of Duty. So instead of gameplay of just clearing rooms of enemies and finding an exit, you actually have mission briefings with objectives like stealing documents, freeing captive agents, destroying weapons, and more. The level design is pretty solid and branches out in interesting ways where in order to complete one objective, you have to complete other tasks. The only issue is that enemy placements can be pretty annoying and just seem like a sort of gotcha moment, which reinforces a habit of constantly saving. The gameplay is much faster than classic Wolfenstein or Doom and much more dangerous. Like I said, get used to saving because this game could get difficult due to enemies being pretty accurate, aggressive, and dealing significant damage if you're not being mindful of your movement and positioning. The shooting feels super satisfying though. There's good visual feedback from taking down enemies due to the great blood and sound effects along with the varied animations. You have a variety of World War II style weapons ranging from pistols, submachine guns, rifles, shotguns, and more. The mod really shines in its presentation though. This is a fantastic looking mod that really pushes GZ Doom in interesting ways. The environments look super polished, have great atmosphere, and it's accentuated by the great music. It even has a narrative with mission briefings and 3 episodes to go through. Simply put, it's a mod made with incredible love and care that rivals that of a full standalone game, and I highly recommend checking it out. So SpongeBob the Cosmic Shake is a decently fun one. I was interested in playing this as I grew up playing Battle for Bikini Bottom and even played the remake. So when I saw a new 3D SpongeBob platformer, I found myself interested, and it ain't half bad. I'd say the game is more linear than Battle for Bikini Bottom, as the need for returning to old levels to collect things like golden spatulas to progress to new levels doesn't seem to be here. Once you complete the main tasks in a level, you leave and move on to the next one. The levels do branch in their own ways though, and there'll be a path or two where you can return with new abilities, but you'd only really do so as a completionist. In overall structure, I'd say it's more similar to the SpongeBob movie game. So far though, the levels have been pretty fun and creative. You'll start off in the Wild West, head to an old martial arts movie set, end up on a pirate island, a spooky Halloween map, and more. Each of the levels have their own little special mechanics and gimmicks. The platforming is pretty much like Battle for Bikini Bottom. It's not a movement platformer with the freedom of, let's say, Mario Odyssey. There's more of a focus on the collect-a-thon aspect, but the movement still feels smooth and you can get around quickly. The game seems to have a bigger focus on combat compared to Battle for Bikini Bottom. Lots of different enemy types, and it genuinely feels pretty fun when you get the karate kick ability, as it lets you zoom around an arena. The comedy in the game isn't half bad and honestly made me laugh with some of the close-up shots. There's also a good amount of references to the old episodes. Only thing that kind of sucks is that you can't play as Patrick or Sandy like in Battle for Bikini Bottom, but SpongeBob still feels fun to play. Overall, Cosmic Shake is a decently entertaining time, but I think Battle for Bikini Bottom feels like a fuller experience. Like a Dragon, Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii, which I'll refer to as Pirate Yakuza for the rest of this review because Jesus Christ, that name is too long. Personally, I think this game is a pretty fun time, but I definitely have some mixed feelings on it. And not because this game is horrible or anything, but it definitely feels undercooked in some regards. And if you're not 100% down for what this game is trying to be, it may feel underwhelming. So for one, the premise is the most bizarre thing ever, even by Yakuza standards. On one hand, it seems pretty damn cool that you're playing a game with classic goofy-ass pirates with swords, pistols, and cannons and a modern-day backdrop, but on the other hand, I feel that in leaning so hard into this weird and crazy premise, it loses the effect of previous RGG titles. I absolutely love the goofy and stupid shit from the Yakuza series, but it always stuck out to me in a really good way because it was embedded in a semi-grounded, overly dramatic soap opera with twists, turns, and conspiracies that are rooted in seedy criminal underworlds. So while the games could hit you with serious subject matter, it would then slap you in the face with the most ridiculous situations imaginable, sometimes in the main content, but especially in the side content. Like being a stoic legendary Yakuza who sings their heart out in karaoke, popping off in dance clubs contemplating ending it all because you played UFO catcher, going deep sea fishing, pocket circuit racing, managing a hostess club, telephone dating, experiencing dumbass revelations, and the multitude of ridiculous side stories. All these things are amazing on their own but feel much more significant because they're in contrast to the serious subject matter. It's this really fun balance that creates a lot of Yakuza's magic for me. But if everything like the premise itself is crazy and wild, then this aspect kinda loses its efficacy because you expect to see the crazy and wild things. It won't have the same kind of kick. Now we've ended up on a game where the premise is us playing a 60-year-old Majima, who is a former legendary Yakuza who washes up on a shore near the islands of Hawaii with no recollection of his past, who is saved by a young boy who wants to go on an adventure to see the outside world, and in the pursuit of your memories, you end up being the captain of a ragtag pirate crew on the search for a legendary lost treasure. This is the most batshit insane premise in any canon Like a Dragon game to date, but I was still super interested in seeing how they would execute it, and I gotta say, it's still a pretty fun adventure, but like I said before, some things feel underdone. So the combat is pretty good, but doesn't hit the same notes as Lost Judgment for me. I don't know what it is, but RGG can't seem to capture that game's combat system in a bottle again. It doesn't have anything to do with the lack of combat styles either, and please note, I'm not saying the combat in this game is bad, it's still pretty good with the Mad Dog and Sea Dog styles, but some aspects feel a little undercooked. For example, the new Sea Dog style has you wielding 2 cutlasses, a pistol, and a hook, but these 3 things kinda lacked interesting synergies and flow because the controls don't feel as snappy as I would have liked to blend these elements together into combos. Another issue is that the attack commitment feels kinda high in this style, so you can be open to damage a lot more frequently, whereas with the Mad Dog style, everything is much faster and more snappy in contrast, making Sea Dog feel a little clunky in comparison, even in situations where it's supposed to excel. The game has the addition of jumping in combat now, which is cool, but feels a little limited in what you can do in the air. It also feels a little unresponsive to get off the ground at times, and it kinda locks you into certain actions. Another thing is that they scaled back the heat actions in this game. There's not as many of them and you only have one heat gauge to spend. With all this being said, you may think I'm saying the combat is dog shit, but like I said, it's not terrible by any means. It's still pretty fun, fast and flashy, mixing in rush combos, heavy attacks, and heat actions. It's just after coming from something like Lost Judgment, this feels a little underwhelming. Where the game really shines though is the naval battles. I didn't think I would care for it so much, but the act of turbo boosting on a big ass ship, drifting and shooting cannons is super fun, even though it can feel a tad simplistic. And the act of upgrading your ship, customizing it, and leveling up your crew is pretty damn satisfying. The game still has a bunch of super goofy side stories and mini games to go through to keep you busy as well, which can reward you with new crew members, upgrades, and more for your ship. You also have crew battle tournaments where you fight on water and on deck, along with there being a separate side story where you take on notoriously dangerous pirate crews in battles on the ground or on the sea to plunder their treasures. Now when it comes to the main story, I found it pretty underwhelming compared to previous Like a Dragon games. You see, RGG always did a good job of creating stories with clear antagonists, dilemmas, conspiracies, character twists, and developments sprinkled in between sections. But this game has 5 chapters total, and you can definitely feel moments where it's padding out for time while simultaneously moving the story a bit too quickly, so you don't really build strong relationships or understandings with the characters, whether they be good or bad. The primary focus is finding a long-lost treasure, which obviously makes sense for a pirate game, but a lot of the aspects I enjoy about the wild stories in the Yakuza titles are kinda missing here, which are the memorable characters, antagonists, dilemmas, and conspiracies. They're not completely missing, mind you, they just feel, once again, undercooked. It being a shorter side game similar to Gaiden doesn't mean much either because I enjoyed Gaiden's stories, characters, and pacing overall. With that being said, there's still some memorable and fun moments in Pirate Yakuza that can keep you engaged for sure, but it's definitely not my favorite story out of the Like a Dragon universe. So yeah, like I said, I had mixed feelings on this game. It's not terrible by any means, it's a Like a Dragon game and a pretty fun one at that despite my complaints of the combat and story, but personally I find you need to be 100% on board with the pirate premise to really get full enjoyment out of this game because I find the best parts actually stem from the pirate gameplay, such as naval battles, ship upgrades, crew building, and the wealth of other side content. I just worry that RGG might be leaning a bit too far into the craziness of this series to the point that it might start to lose its magic, and that's a sensation I'm experiencing with this game. Although with the announcement of Project Century and seeing how dark, gritty, and gruesome that game looks, my fears are being quelled a tad bit, but that game could create the opposite issue where it's just too dark and gritty. Point is, RGG had a good balance of seriousness and goofiness, but Pirate Yakuza might just be a bit too goofy, and hopefully Project Century isn't too dark and serious. So that was all the games I played throughout the month of February. We got a classic title, a Metroidvania, action adventures, a shooter, a platformer, and some extreme sports action. I hope you enjoyed this new format as it actually makes things a bit easier for me, believe it or not, and allows me to try and talk about much more games. Thank you for watching, and let me know what you thought in the comments below. Peace.